Hello and welcome. I'm Swithin Fry from The Spirit Within, the international friendship for people in their third age. And it's particularly fabulous to welcome another member of the Vancouver Island community today. Our first one was Colin Crawford with his Songs of Comfort. And today I would like to welcome Christine Allan. Christine,
Thank you
Chris,
so much.
hello, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So let's start with my questions, if I may. First
Yes.
question, how old are you? Are you eligible to come on to a third age interview?
Oh, totally. I'm 74 years old.
74. Well
Yeah.
done. Well done. You don't look it, if I may say.
Oh,
If I may
thank
say.
you.
Yeah, yeah. And okay, you live on Vancouver Island, but you
Yeah.
don't sound particularly Canadian. Can you tell us your sort of geographical journey?
Yes. I'm from Nottingham originally, and I lived there until I went to Newcastle upon Tyne to train to be a teacher. I completed that, married, and lived in the African bush for 2 years, which was quite the experience. We then returned to Northumberland, and we were there for 6 years, and went off to California to live, which was a totally different experience from living in the bush. We lived there for 5 years and then moved to Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I lived there almost 30 years before I discovered Vancouver Island. That was a much more beautiful place to live. So I've lived here nearly 9 years, and it's been a joyful experience.
Great. Going back to the African bush, what part of Africa were you in?
Zambia. And we spent much of the time in a Zambian game reserve, which was about the size of Wales. So it was huge. Food came on the back of a truck once every 2 weeks. We had radio contact twice a week and made our own roads. The water came from the river. It was a very solitary existence.
And so, what were you doing there? Were you teaching?
My husband was a geologist, and he was diamond prospecting for an international company.
Right. And then you went back to the UK.
Yes.
And then to California.
Yes.
So what took you to California?
Work. By this time, my husband had a PhD and there wasn't any work in England. So he went to work for a major oil company in the research department.
And what about yourself, your career?
Oh, well, the reason I went to Newcastle was to train to be a teacher. And the reason we came back to England from Africa was so that I could do my qualifying year as a teacher, an elementary school teacher. So that was my story, yes.
And when you went to California, were you teaching in California?
No, they would not accept my qualifications, but I then decided that I would be a teacher's aide. I have 2 daughters, and in their elementary school, which was a really good way to learn the educational system in Orange County, and also to get to know people.
Oh, I'm sure, yes. Whereabouts are your daughters now in the world?
Well, actually, one has lived on Vancouver Island for a very long time, and the other one lived in Calgary and moved out here just 3 years ago. So they live in Victoria.
Right, very nice.
About 2 hours away, which is perfect.
Very nice. Okay, So during all this time, what was going on for you? Was it just a nice smooth ride of life? And
No, I wouldn't describe it as such. I've been widowed twice. My younger daughter was diagnosed with acute leukemia a few years after my husband died, and that was a roller coaster. She was in remission. She was in hospital for 3 months, then she was in remission for a year, and then she was back in hospital for 3 months, and the only recourse was a transplant. And unfortunately, we didn't have a related donor, but wonderfully, miraculously, there was an unrelated donor who was the perfect match. And so it's been a long, arduous journey for her. But she celebrates her 17th year at the end of July. So it is wonderful. And not only that, she's just been reunited with her donor who lives in Germany. So it's a fantastic circle. Yes. So with my husband dying, I had to really start again. Then years later, I met my partner, and he just died actually 2 years ago. On the way here to Vancouver Island, we were involved in a rollover accident, and I was seriously injured and was sent back to Calgary. I thought I'd never leave. I'd lived there 30 years, and halfway here, I was returned to Calgary and spent 3 months having medical treatment. But I'm here, I'm alive, I'm fit, I'm able, and I'm happy. So good things, yeah.
But you are certainly the person to ask some advice about difficult times. Yes. And so we've sort of covered a geographical journey.
Yes, indeed, yes.
And what about a spiritual journey?
Well, I think that has been quite the bumpy road too. I was brought up in the Methodist Church, and it has given me a rudder in life, for which I'm very grateful. But otherwise, I've tried various alternatives to the standard church, and I'm a great believer in Reiki. I have seen the power of Reiki physically. Whilst my daughter was in the hospital, a Reiki master would come in and perform Reiki twice a week. And I was very amazed one day. The oncologist entered the room while this was going on, and he's a very important and busy person. And he looked at Jane's face, and he said, and that's my daughter, and he said, "I'll come back," because he recognized the beneficial properties of what was happening in that room. And I have had Reiki treatment, and there are 3 levels to become a Reiki master. I did up to level 2, and so I've seen the effect on people. I wish I knew exactly how it worked, but it does work, and it gives great peace, enlightenment, just a beautiful feeling. So I'm a great believer in Reiki. The other course that I took was the sweat lodges that we have here with our native people. And I've had 2 experiences, and one was very positive and one was very negative. I truly believe that the negative experience was because the experience was too intense for me, as it was my first attempt, and I went the whole 4 rounds, and I probably should have gone maybe 2. and that's what the master suggested, that it had been too intense. My second sweat lodge was in Mexico, and yet again, it was a totally different experience, and I was euphoric. It elevated me to a different realm. It was an incredible experience. So I'm stumbling along the road. I'm open to many things. And your series has really brought it to my attention that I need to work on this. I really do.
Can you just explain to people who may not know what a sweat lodge is, what exactly is a sweat lodge?
It's physically, it's a conical building, no windows, it's totally enclosed, and a small opening for the door. And it's fairly big. You can get at least 30 people in there sitting in a circle. And in the middle, there are very hot rocks. And they get, it's divided into 4 rounds. And each round there is chanting, there's the fire, it gets hotter, there's meditation, and there's a pipe that can be passed around if you wish to partake, which I didn't. And there's drums. And I cannot tell you for how long it goes on, because you know, you have no concept of time or anything. And each time you go back in for another session, it gets hotter and hotter. It can be quite claustrophobic. You've really got to bring your mind into that place and just absorb the whole experience. Now, conversely, the one in Mexico, it wasn't dark. It was, there were only 3 of us. Yet again, there was the fire. It didn't get as hot. There was the chanting. So it was a totally different experience. Rather than being North American, it was Mexican. And my whole being responded much better to that experience. But both were very worthwhile. And I knew after the first experience that I would go again and try it under different circumstances. But I didn't know when. But the opportunity came when I was on holiday in the grounds of the hotel I was staying in. So it was meant to be.
Absolutely. I'm interested to know, coming from a very sort of traditional Methodist background and then going into something extremely alternative like that, what was it that guided you to do that?
Basically, it was my Reiki master, and that goes back to my daughter being in hospital, because she was recommended to us by a nurse. And obviously, with my daughter being there 3 months, we got to know her very well. And I became interested in Reiki, and through that, she suggested that we do this, go to the sweat lodge. So that's how I did become involved with this. And I'm always seeking different experiences, you know, whether it be dog sledding on a mountain in Alaska, or whitewater rafting down the Zambezi River. You know, life is full of adventure. So
have you actually done those 2 things?
Yes.
I'm very impressed, Chris. I'm very impressed.
Not recently. But highlights of my life, yes.
And so you actually did some Reiki training yourself?
Yes, I did. Yes.
And did you say you stopped at level 2 rather than going on to level 3?
Yes.
Why was that?
I think it was the circumstances, because my daughter, when she was released from the hospital, it took her several years before she was really on her own. The lasting symptom from leukemia is fatigue, and therefore she needed a lot of help. So I spend a lot of time helping her.
Right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So my world narrowed.
Would you be tempted to go back and do level 3?
It would have to be with the right Reiki master. And I, to be honest, I haven't found one here that I have really responded well to. You have to have that that magic, that essence of faith and confidence in who you're dealing with, you know.
I very much admire your open-minded approach to all this. You know, I think that's admirable. Admirable.
Well, thank you. It makes life very interesting. I don't know what I'd do in a rut.
No, I don't think there's any chance of that, is there, Chris?
Yeah. Although I must say that COVID, of course, has put us all in a little bit of a rut. You know, we don't have the opportunities to experience the things that we were enjoying before, but it has opened up a whole new life, which is quite interesting, really. And I think that you have to put it in perspective, because we tend to think of just us right now in the world. But this has happened over and over again. As humans, we've gone through much worse. And luckily, I truly believe that we're hardwired to survive virtually anything. And, you know, with seeing both of my husbands and my daughter very, very sick, they don't give up. The human spirit does not give up. And sometimes you hear people say, well, if I get really ill, shoot me. I don't want to go through it all. But the evidence in my eyes, and it's not great, a great deal of people, but people will do anything to survive. And that's what we're doing in this pandemic. People are adapting and finding other ways to enjoy life.
Yes,
I think it's amazing.
Have you had any experience of anybody catching the virus and possibly dying from the virus?
No. As of now, we're very fortunate on Vancouver Island that I don't think we've had any deaths in a couple of weeks. And certainly I haven't even heard of anyone on Vancouver Island, although there are some, of course. But in my particular sphere, then I haven't. I haven't.
Yeah. So, but you have experienced extremely difficult times. And so what sort of words of comfort would you suggest for people going through a very difficult time?
Believe that things will get better. They can get better. And if they don't get better, life will go on. It will go on differently, but there is still joy to be found. I think one of my, I was going to say weapons, but that's the wrong word. But one of the things that comes naturally to me to get through difficult situations is humor. And I have found that even in the darkest times, there is sometimes, often, there's something humorous. It may be black humor, I'm not saying it isn't, but humor is a great strength if you can see the funny side of things. And that's not taking away from the awfulness. of illness and death. But there's that little glimmer. There's always a glimmer of hope. And also people. You will find, or I have found, that people appear out of nowhere to give comfort and succor. They might disappear at the end of all this, but somehow they magically appear, and you find out who your real friends are, and that you find that you've really got a lot of really good friends too. So, and also I don't think that you are really alone. I don't know if I believe in God or not, but there is something beyond our ken, and it lives within you. And so I don't know if these are words of comfort, but these are the words that have gotten me through. Just a little light. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel.
I'm interested to know, how do you think, have you kind of more or less always had that quite positive take on life? Or is this something which has grown within you over the years?
I think it's grown within me. As I mentioned, I was a teacher, and when I came to Canada, they too wouldn't accept my qualifications, and I would have had to go back to university for 2 years, and I really didn't want to do that because I had young children in school. Oh dear. And so I became a preschool teacher, and I owned a preschool. I had 84 students and 5 teachers, and one had to be positive the whole time. Because you're dealing with people's most precious child. And so you couldn't go in with a glum face or a negative attitude. And so I think over the years, and I did this for 20 years, that I became positive. And during that 20 years, of course, first of all, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and I nursed him, and he died. And then my daughter was diagnosed with cancer twice, and I nursed her. And then latterly, my partner was diagnosed with cancer, and I helped him on this journey. And so you have to be positive and upbeat and be a support. So I think it's something that has developed in me through the years. And going to Africa and living in the bush, I went from living with 35 young women in residence in a big city in England to my husband and I and 3 or 4 Africans in the middle of nowhere, no television, nothing to do because there was nowhere to go, and I even had a cook, and there was literally nothing for me to do except the radio. So you have to adapt, and so you have to find the best of this, and you do. By the time I left the bush after 2 years, I could have lived there for another 2 years. So yeah, it's something I think that didn't come naturally. It's developed. Good question. I like it.
A good answer. I like it. Oh, Chris, we've covered quite a bit of ground already. Is there anything that you think maybe we haven't touched on that you would like to touch on?
In relation to COVID?
In relation to anything that you said? Well, especially COVID, I suppose, but in relation to anything.
Oh, that is such a general question. It's I could go on at length about many things, but I don't think you. No, I truly believe in the perspective of it all, that we have to put it in context of this has happened many, many times before. This is natural. And it will happen many times in the future. And it will end. It's just part of our evolution. I truly believe that.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. Christine Allan, thank you very much for coming on to Words of Comfort and giving us words of comfort. Very interesting story as well, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Swithin. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.